Welcome to the Xennial Rewind. I'm Moby.
I'm RGX.
Yeah, welcome back here today, viewers. A little bit of an interesting show. Leland, unfortunately, called in sick. He lost his voice right before we had to record, or I should say the day of. And as they say, that old cliche, the show must go on because our ability to get all our schedules to mesh and record would not permit us waiting longer. So if the show seems a little different than the other episodes, it's because we got to do what we got to do. But yeah, very excited for today's episode. We've got my monologue coming up in a moment here. And then we're going to discuss cars, our own cars, cars in pop culture, our fantasy cars that we want. See if there's any differences there between the millennial on this show and the Gen Xer. So excited to talk about that there. Let's jump into the monologue, though. And the monologue has nothing to do with cars. It has to do with the release of a game in one of my favorite series, which is the Sid Meier's Civilization series of 4X strategy games. So this is a game I've been playing since Civilization 4. I bought 4, 5, 6, and now we're on to Civilization 7. And I tell you, I'm very disappointed with the launch, and here's why. First of all, there was that thing that happened a couple years ago where games always seem to be about like 60 or 80 bucks, and suddenly every gaming company says due to inflation, they got to increase that price. I think it actually started with Nintendo, don't quote me on that. But now games are starting like base price 20 bucks more than they were a couple years ago. But I also paid to get early access to that game 5 days early. So dropped on February 6th for me. And so I spent about, I would say $150 total Canadian funds to get that deluxe early access. And what did I get? I got a broken, incomplete game that my buddy who also bought it, the early edition, just so we could play, released on a Thursday. We took the Friday off work, both of us. And I tell you, this thing couldn't maintain an internet connection for us together. It was like rebooting every second turn. It was kicking us to the lobby. We couldn't do a standard Steam invite to get each other into a game. We had to actually we figured out we had to go into the game single player, like go to the menu screen, then go into multiplayer, then do a Steam invite. And that was the only way it would connect. You had bugs, whether they were visual bugs, audio bugs, etc. It was just a disaster. So anyways, they release a patch later on Saturday to fix some of these issues. But by the time Saturday comes, I mean, the whole point of buying 5 extra days out of this game is for that weekend, to have that weekend to play. And we really didn't have good access to that game until Saturday evening, which is just a total disappointment for the amount of money that we paid. Not only was the game not optimized and kind of broken, but I found out there was DLC or will be DLC released next month in March. And to me, I'm going, that close together, that's not DLC, that's cut content that they already have that they're just going to make us pay extra for. So even if you didn't pay the deluxe amount of money the money that I did for the deluxe early access version of the game, buy yourself that extra 5 days. Even if you did not do that, by my estimate, I think you're still going to be about $120 into this game just for the first month. And that's ridiculous. Now, the guy I play with, Civilization by far is his favorite of all games. He's a total apologist for it. And him and I had, I guess, I wouldn't say it was an intense discussion, but we definitely disagreed with each other because this guy's going, oh, well, gaming companies, they're under so much pressure. They have rising salaries. They have rising costs. They need this new methodology to release games. They need more money or there's going to be no games at all. And I just got to call BS on that. From my opinion, I'm sorry. This is millennials and Gen X, but I grew up with games where, they were primarily on physical media and they had to be complete. And if they were not complete, they would get like a a 3 out of 10 in the review, and everyone would pile on that company and not buy the game. And unfortunately, we're in a place now with digital releases where, because companies think they can fall back on these hot fixes and bug patches, that they're just releasing games that they haven't really bug tested. And no, this is not a case for me of inflation and companies need more money or they're not going to survive. To me, this is greed and laziness combined. This game, my bad experience here, will change my future behavior. I will not buy a early access package that buys me an extra week or two for a game in the future, because I don't want to buy that time and then have half that time spent waiting for the developer to make a hot fix to make the game even playable. Like, I'm sorry, that's too far. That's disappointing. That's my monologue. RGX, I don't know if you know about this situation, but do you have any thoughts on that?
Civilization was a game that I started playing way back, like in the day. And that's back in the day when you bought a game, you had the game. There was no DLCs, there was no updates, there was no extra money put into the game like there is nowadays. And really, that's the thing. That's a whole another conversation that I can have about how DLCs and how download content and updates kind of just ruin the whole gaming market. I mean, at least for me. Because when I grew up, essentially when you bought a game, you bought a game. That was the final copy. So they had to put all their effort and all their, cross all their T's and dot all their I's before they sent it out to make sure that it was a good product. Where now they kind of just send out half-ass products and then, oh, well, we're going to go ahead and do this update and we're going to do this patch. And then, oh, we got this DLC and these DLCs. I mean, before you're done, there's some games where you pay more for the DLCs than you do for the original game over and over and over and over and over again. I mean, it's honestly just crazy the way it is. But it just makes me wonder how Sid Meier kind of thinks about this, because you guys kind of know me, how I'm the gaming historian type of guy, I guess. But Sid Meier's story is kind of unique. So really, he's a Canadian as well. He was born in Ontario, Canada. They moved here to Michigan when he was 3 years old. He graduated in 1975 with a computer science degree. But it wasn't until I think like 1980 or 81 where he bought an Atari 800 computer and he started dabbling around with the programming on that and decided that he wanted to get into programming and making games and other things. In 1982, he created Microprose, which was basically his company. And what it started out was making like 2D games, just arcade 2D games. Then it eventually turned into more of a flight simulator company. So there was different games like Hellcat Ace, Spitfire Ace, and then of course the F-15 Strike Eagle that I had on my Commodore 64. Just an amazing game. And anytime you saw that Microprose label going across when you booted up a game, you knew you had a good quality game back then. But really, he didn't gain attraction until like 1987. That's when Sid Meier himself really became famous and made his company kind of famous as well, with the release of Pirates in 1987. I don't know if you guys have ever seen that game, but man, I had that back on my Commodore and I spent weeks, months, probably years playing that game. It's where basically you're a pirate back in like from the 1700s to the 1800s, and you can pick either English, Dutch, Spanish, French, that type of thing. And then you just go around trying to hunt other pirates. You become royalty within like
Oh,
these different countries. So you can work for England and attack the Spanish. And then you kind of gain notoriety with the Spanish, and then they start hating you and attacking you. But then the English, give you all these certifications and things where you become like an earl, or an ensign, an earl, a duke, that kind of thing. And you just build your progress up and you just build yourself up until eventually you retire. And depending on where you retire, either you're going to be like a pauper, or you're going to be somebody really rich with a bunch of land and a beautiful wife and all this other stuff. So really, really cool game if you guys haven't checked that out. But that's what really started getting me into Sid Meier. And then I think it was in 1990 or 1991 is when the first Civilization game was released. And that's the first one that I played. and honestly, the only one that I've played. After that, I didn't really play anymore. But really cool game. Now they did re-release both Civilization and Pirates on the Xbox. I think it was like in 2005ish or so. But by 1993, Microprose got bought out by Spectrum Holobyte, and essentially what they did was start doing mass layoffs of the people that were part of Microprose. And Sid Meier and a few of the higher ups of Microprose that were part of Microprose decided to leave the company at that point. And in 1995, they created Fire Axis Games. And that's basically the game company that's been making these Civilization games and all these Sid Meier games ever since. Now, Sid Meier really hasn't had a hand in making these games since probably the early 1990s, but his name is still on it, so he's definitely getting the credits for this. So it kind of sucks to see that they're kind of dragging this franchise into the ground with all the DLCs and just the way the content and how the programs are made and that kind of stuff nowadays. So it's kind of sad to see that because I remember way back in the day how good all of his programs were back in the Microprose days. So but yeah, definitely kind of sad to see that happen, but good to see that the company or at least those franchises still do exist.
I think that's some good history there, but I think you touched on something as well, kind of reading between the lines. Sid Meier was disappointed in the 90s with the direction that Microprose was heading. So he goes and, starts Fire Axis Games, to try to get back to that, we're developers for the gamers. We're not going to just be a giant, faceless corporation without a soul. But I feel like that's what's happening all over again. And maybe he can't do much because this is kind of like a runaway train now where, he's got this big corporation once again. And I can't see how a guy like Sid Meier, I've seen some interviews. He seems like a gentleman, like a genuinely nice guy. I can't see how he would like what's going on. Like, if I were able to corner him and prove to him this is a soundproof room with no recording devices, tell me the truth, what you feel about Civilization VII's launch, I think he would be very critical of the DLC, of the amount of money, of what you got or didn't get for buying that 5 days early access. Um, I just can't see how that would jive with a guy that came from a time where his first, I would say probably 4 or 5 Civilization games had to be released because they had big physical releases. They had to be released complete, bug tested, etc. So it's only been the last 2 games. Civilization 6 had similar issues at launch, but I don't recall the issues being as bad with the bugs, like with it being almost unplayable. And it also was much less expensive 9 years ago when Civ 6 came out. So yeah, I guess my closing point on this would just be I really hope in his last days before I guess he formally retires or whatnot, if Sid Meier can somehow once again change the culture and make sure that Civilization 8 and hopefully the rest of the franchise does never have a release like this again. So very disappointed.
And if you guys want to help change the culture, don't forget to hit that sub, that like, and that notification bell. That way you guys can get notifications every time we drop new content just like this video here. So if you like this podcasting type of stuff, it's definitely going to be the show for you guys. As we grew up as kids, we always had some kind of car or automobile, at least for Gen X, for me, that really kind of stood out, that was just part of that pop culture that you grew up with. And really, the first one that kind of stands out in my mind is the General Lee from the Dukes of Hazzard. So that 69 Dodge Charger was just an amazing car, guys. God, I fell in love with that vehicle. I think all of us Gen Xers from that time frame, I mean, if you were alive during that time when the Dukes of Hazzard was actually on TV, I mean, it was just such a big phenomenon. So, as you guys know, the 69 Charger, the Mopar thing, just an amazing car. Now, obviously, you had the General Lee and you had Bo and Duke Luke and all that kind of stuff. But you also had Daisy Duke. I mean, who can forget about Daisy? Duke. I mean, that was probably a lot of us Gen Xers' first crush besides like Farrah Fawcett or something like that. Brooke Shields, that type of thing. But Daisy Duke, man, Catherine Bach back in the day, whoo, man, she was such a hottie. And the cool thing about her is she was like this such sweet, innocent girl, but behind it all, she knew how to kick ass and how to get things done. So, I mean, it was really kind of cool how that ended up happening too. And it kind of brought women to the forefront too, and just kind of showing women, hey, you can be the sexy, attractive little girl if you want to be, but you can still kick ass too if you want to. So I think that's really kind of cool. Now, another thing that Dukes of Hazzard kind of brings up to me when I was a kid. Now, of course, all the cars. Now, there wasn't just the General Lee. There was Boss Hogg's Cadillac. There was Roscoe's patrol car. There was Cooter's tow truck. There was Uncle Jesse's Ford pickup truck. Now, all these had a car set made by Ertl. And I remember back in the day when I was a little kid, my mom and dad probably bought me like, I don't know how many of these Dukes of Hazzard sets because I would sit out in the backyard. And this is a straight up Gen X things, guys. I would sit out in the backyard and make these little tracks and be playing with they were like little matchbox cars, be playing with them. And here comes the General Lee about to, crash into something. And then I would like take a M80 firecracker and light it inside of it and have the car blow up. These are the kind of things we used to do. So I don't know how many of those freaking sets my parents ended up buying for us, but just kind of really cool how, you just remember all those things. And was how all those little automobiles, the Fords and the Dodges and the Jeeps and Daisy's Jeep. I mean, really kind of cool to think about all that. Let's go on to the next car that was kind of part of my bringing up and really kind of got me into the forefront of all this stuff behind me and the career that I had in IT, and that's KITT from Knight Rider. So I mean, what a freaking amazing car that was. So now we all know that the third gen Pontiac Firebird really wasn't that great of a car. It was underpowered, it had all that emission crap going on inside of it. But the show just made it look like it was the best freaking car ever, 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 ever. Um, and it really wasn't. We all know how bad the Firebird was. I think, what did it come with? Like a 305 V8 that put out like 125 horsepower or something like that. I mean, it was just horrible with the California emissions and the smog pump. Oh, it was just bad. But the cool thing about the show is that it really brought technology and the automotive industry together, and it kind of showed us what could happen here in the future. And if you look at Knight Rider now, and then you look at like a Tesla, I mean, some of that stuff is kind of transferred over. You got the whole computer in the car, it talks to you, it does this, it does that, it even drives its freaking self nowadays. I mean, just kind of amazing that how far we've gotten from the 1980s where it was just kind of a dream to where it's become a reality nowadays. So just kind of amazing to see that happen. But Moby, what kind of pop culture cars did you have growing up?
Yeah, so it's interesting because KITT from Knight Rider was actually one. So one of those cars. So you got to remember, like, I'm 39 now. When I was growing up in the 90s, I was quite young. I started the decade at 5 years old. And KITT actually is the first car I remember that I thought was really cool, just because it looked cool and it could talk and it had this AI. The funny thing was, so KITT obviously is a Firebird. My uncle had a Camaro, which looked very similar, but his Camaro was always broken. And being a very young kid, I just put together that like the Camaro was the shitty version of the Firebird. And like if you had money or knew about cars, you just buy the Firebird and it'd be like perfect and could probably talk to you. And then the Camaro was just this shit thing that my uncle accidentally bought and was a lemon, and he was pouring so much work and money into it. So that's pretty funny. That's the only car from early childhood that I remember like really noticing and idealizing. As I became a teenager, here's one that's going to catch you a little off guard. I really like the BMW. I think it was from the 7 series in the James Bond movie Tomorrow Never Dies. Basically,
Mhm.
it's got, all the Bond cars have gadgets and bulletproof windshields and stuff. But that one, James Bond could actually take his phone, like swipe his phone up. It was like one of those Nokia type phones from the late 90s. But like he could flip it up and suddenly it had this huge screen and like just a trackpad. It really was like a precursor to the smartphones of nowadays. And there's a scene where Pierce Brosnan's hiding out in the back seat of that car so he can hide from bullets, but he's just using the screen and the onboard cameras on his BMW to drive this thing around a parkade. Yeah, that BMW I really noticed. And then I would think the last one. So here, I love Back to the Future. Over my shoulder, I've got a piece of art from Marty McFly. Who doesn't love the DeLorean? That's my all-time favorite. But my parents just didn't like Back to the Future. They weren't morally against it. It just didn't interest them. So we never owned it. We never rented it. Case in point, I first saw it in like 2005 when I was 20 years old. That was when I first saw Back to the Future. But I tell you, I love the movie and I absolutely love the DeLorean. So yeah, those three cars were the ones for me. KITT, BMW 7 Series from Tomorrow Never Dies. And, as I entered young adulthood, the DeLorean, and the DeLorean is number one. We want to move this discussion into our first cars as well, RGX, because I know we both have some pretty entertaining stories about our cars that will never live up to these pop culture cars we just discussed. So tell me, man, what was your first car? And if you got some stories about that thing.
Man, so it was kind of crazy. So through high school, I had actually 4 cars. So I'll kind of talk
Oh.
about only 2, but I'll discuss the other ones too. So my very, very first car I ever had was a 1974 Chevy Vega. And it had that horrible aluminum block freaking 4-cylinder straight, 4-cylinder engine. Um, I ended up swapping that out and putting a V8 350 in it, a Chevy 350. It still had the little 3-speed transmission though, and there was an adapter kit, and oh, it was just a horrible monster of a car. Ended up selling that thing. Never even drove that. I didn't even have a permit when I had that car. So technically I didn't own it. My dad owned it, but it was my car. So we ended up selling that, and we ended up buying a 1980 Volkswagen Rabbit 4-door for me. And that was the first car that I learned how to drive. That when I got my permit, that's the car I learned how to drive in. It was a little 4-speed manual, and I remember my dad taking me out trying to teach me how to drive a manual, and he was like really impressed that could go and drive this thing. I mean, I just kind of got it and went. And then he took me up on this really steep freaking hill. And he's like, okay, if you can stop on this hill and go, then I give you some props. And of course, I was like,
Yeah. Oh
he's like,
man.
yeah, you need to learn some more. But I ended up getting trading that car in, and then the my first real car was a 1982 Dodge Charger 2.2 liter engine. So this is when the Dodge Charger went from the big V8 to a smaller. It almost looked like the Dodge Daytona is what it kind of looked like. Even though the Daytona came after, but it kind of had that same kind of body 2+2 style, um, but with a little 4-cylinder K car engine, the 2.2-liter Dodge engine in it. And yeah, that car was totally underpowered and it really sucked. And it was supposed to compete with the Camaro and the Mustang, but obviously it didn't. But it was a really, really cool car, and the chicks just dug that car in high school. And I had the speakers in the back and all that kind of stuff. But with that car, guys, I can tell you because it had that stupid 2.2-liter K car engine in it, I had to work on that car every weekend to get it to go. I mean, literally, it was always something. It was this going wrong, that going wrong. So every weekend I was in there tooling around to get it to work for the next week, and then the next weekend I would be in there tooling around on it again to get it to work, just so I could take it back and forth to school, work, and to drive it on the Ave, because that was the big thing back in my days, driving your cars on the Ave back and forth until the cops would pull you over and shit. But um, yeah, I mean that car was kind of cool, but I ended up trading that thing in, and then I ended up getting a 1988 Ford Escort GT. Now this car was a really cool looking car, guys. Honestly, it looked like a little, I would say like a miniature Ford Mustang GT back in the day, like the Fox body Mustang. It literally looks like the Fox body was smushed down, just like that. And so it was kind of a cool looking car. But yeah, I got so many stories with that car. But probably the funniest story that I remember about that car is, just picture this. So it's a Ford Escort GT on 13-inch KMC 50 series deep well tires. So the car only sat about this far off the ground. It had like illegal tinted windows. They had neon on the bottom, all this kind of crap. Okay. It was an Av crawler. That's what it did. But a whole bunch of my friends and us went up into the mountains. So it was, I think, two of my friends and their two girlfriends, and it was me. We went up into the mountains because we used to live in Colorado Springs at the time. So we went up to this place called Seven Falls where they have this little parking lot. So we went in there, and as I drove into the parking lot, I noticed that there was like somebody had dumped a Christmas tree because it was right after Christmas. But we are like, whatever. So we're up there and we're just kind of partying in the car. I had like these mood lights in the car and we had the speakers going and we're having a good old time. And I'm sitting there taking a drink and I'm like, and this is bad, guys. Don't be drinking and driving. Don't do this. This is not good. But this is stories from when we were young and dumb. But so I'm sitting there taking a drink and I see this thing kind of going across in the tree line. And so there's a road that's right across the tree line there. And I had like my fog lights barely dimly on. So it was just a little bit of light hitting like the tree line. But through the tree line, I could see a car driving through, and you could very, very distinctly see the reflection of the cops. You know, that like reflective tape they have on the side of their car. Turned the lights off completely, put it in reverse, and backed up. And bam, I thought I hit something. I don't know what the hell I hit. So I was like, man, I just gotta go. I gotta go. So I put it in drive. We take off out of this parking lot with no lights on. And we go and we go and go. And finally, I pull over because you can hear something dragging under the car. And I'm like, what the hell? And it's that fucking Christmas tree, guys. That Christmas tree that was it was stuck
Oh
underneath
man.
the bumper of the car. And my bumper, literally, because it was a plastic bumper, so now I had this big old dent in it. And oh my God, guys. So I ended up getting it home, taking the plastic part of the bumper off, and actually the metal underneath the bumper was dented. So, what did I do? The red and green fix. Get a little duct tape and get a 4x4 piece of wood and replace the metal bumper with a 4x4 piece of wood.
Wow. Oh,
I
man.
ended up trading that car in like that, guys. Could you believe that?
Push, pull, or drag, as they say, right? That's what they say up here. Push, pull, or drag. Get your whatever, your 2 grand or whatever it is for that. Oh
I'm,
man,
I'm telling
those
you,
are some
man. But
crazy stories.
that's my stories about my cars. Moby, what do you got, man?
So I've only owned 4 cars my whole life. The most recent two are not really interesting. But the first one definitely is. So I'm going to spend like my time talking 90% about my first car. My second car just kind of has one funny story to do with it. But my first car was a 1994 Mercury Topaz. I didn't want it, but my parents wanted me to have it because it was an exceptional deal. And the reason why it was an exceptional deal is it was my brother's best friend's grandfather's car, but he had depression and some mental health issues, and he parked that car in his garage and ran a garden hose from the exhaust into the car. And I know with YouTube you're not allowed to say the S word, but he removed himself from this mortal coil, and so the family just wanted to get rid of this car on the cheap, and it was in great condition. He drove it well. But it was funny because that story didn't freak me out at all. I'm just not someone who gets weirded out over those sorts of things. I mean, it's not like the car was, of course, clean by the time I got it. But I tell you, I had some friends where like this one guy, I'll tell you his first name was Jesse, mentor of mine. He was a few years older. We're on the friggin' highway, and I don't know how it comes up, but I let him know why I got the car for cheap. And this guy is a full-on panic attack. He rolls down the passenger side window on the highway, buckles, takes off his seatbelt buckle, and this guy climbs. He's climbing onto the roof of my car on the highway where I can't pull over because he's having a panic attack about this morbid story, thinking there's a ghost in my car or something. And I'm driving and I'm literally grabbing this guy. Like he will fully go onto the roof. And I was grabbing him with all my muscle power I had, which is very little, to keep him inside the car. And yeah, luckily I found a place to pull over and like calm him down. And, you know, he had to breathe into the paper bag because he was hyperventilating. So, I mean, I think he overreacted, but, you know, that's the case. And that car was shit, man. I mean, 2.3 liter, four banger, 96 horsepower, dragging along like 3,000 pounds of that thing. I tell you, like, if you were flat, it was okay, but I would go visit my friend in we call it the interior, British Columbia, and you have to take a mountain road to get there. And there's a few steep sections. And there were times where I was full on pedal to the metal in the right lane, and semi trucks were still passing me getting up that hill. Like that's how bad it was in this thing. And when I say pedal to the metal, I mean pedal to the metal and praying to every god that exists that this car makes it up the hill. And I had to do that every time. Other things that went wrong with it, early on, I broke some sort of bracket on the driver's seat. So I was constantly like twisting as I was driving. And so my back would really hurt for any trip beyond, I would say, half an hour, which sucked. I just had all sorts of problems. I mean, so many components were just cheap oxygen sensors, cheap brakes, cheap everything. Everything broke all the time. It was like a classic, you know, kind of first car. It was comfortable other than the seats, you know, the Topaz was the premium version of the Tempo, the Ford Tempo.
Yep.
So, you know, premium as they could do, but yeah, I mean, the only really good thing it had a what do you call it? An immobilizer. So it basically had a thing on my keys. It was an aftermarket immobilizer, and the engine wouldn't start unless I pressed this little thing in, and that actually saved me some insurance money as well. Someone had put in an aftermarket CD player, and it had one of those detachable face plates. So as long as I remembered to take that with me, nobody wanted to break in and steal it because it just wouldn't work. But yeah, I mean, I ran that thing for a few years. I would say, I'm trying to remember how many years I ran it, probably about 7. And then it just had a bunch of stuff fall apart on it all at once. One of the back brakes seized. That was really the point where I stopped driving it. I'm like, okay, well, I'm not going to get this wheel unseized. But I remember I parked it at my dad's, who had some acreage, and when I was getting it picked up by some company that just offered to pick up junk cars for free, I don't know, they junked and made a few bucks. But I had to drive it along this driveway to get it to the road, even with the seized wheel. So this thing's dragging itself, screeching like a banshee because of the my dad's driveway was steel pavement. It wasn't dirt. So it was screeching as it was dragging itself. Something had happened to the wiring underneath. So the wiring underneath the dashboard, I don't know what it was, but it was like 4th of July, like sparking. Luckily, it was a wet day and it was wet inside the car, so nothing caught on fire. But just driving this thing to the road, sparks going everywhere. Yeah, it was done. It was absolutely done. Second car I had was a 1996 Honda Civic Coupe. I really wanted a Civic. Just like they're just good all around cars. It was the EX model, so it had a bunch, you know, air conditioning, cruise control, all the bells and whistles. Good little car. I only had it for a few years, maybe 2 or 3. But that started a problem I had with my third car, which was a slightly newer model Civic. Head gaskets. Head gaskets just kept going on that thing for me. And luckily, my next door neighbor was a mechanic in training, and he would offer to fix it on the cheap. But I probably did 2 or 3 head gaskets on that thing. It was like one a year. And I don't know what I was doing wrong to blow out those gaskets, but I had it happen with my other Civic as well. But the one good story I have with the Civic EX, so I drive this thing a few years. It was gonna need another head gasket replacement, but right before Christmas, it's parked outside. Actually, on my podcast, our former co-host Marty, we call him Ghost Marty. It was parked outside of his place, and Leland's there as well. And we just actually were chilling. And we hear this huge grinding sound, and we go outside, and my car, the back left quadrant, is like flat. It's crushed. And we look down the road, and there's a jacked pickup truck with its axle torn off, still trying to push itself with its like rear wheel drive along the road. So, we run, we're big guys, we run out, and there's some little blonde hottie in the car, drunk out of her mind. We open the door and beer cans were falling out of her car. And she is absolutely hammered. So we called the cops. The cops came, arrested her for DUI. But the funny thing is, we have government, all our insurance out here is monopolized by the government. And you basically have to go through only one government insurance company, and they're notorious for shortchanging you. But for whatever reason, they offered me $400 more than I bought the car. So I didn't even negotiate. I was ready to try to get it as close to my purchase price from 3 years ago as I could. But they just come out of the gate. They're like, hey, we'll offer you, I think I bought it for $2,200. They offered me $2,600. So I'm like, all right, cut a check, and bought my new Civic. So yeah, those are my two stories. But Leland's not here. He thought he would not have interesting stories about his cars, but I'm going to fill in for him because I've got a few interesting stories about his. Really quick here. Number one, and this is what I was going to bug Leland about, his mom is high up in the oil and gas industry. She's an executive. So Leland's got some golden card where he's basically never had to pay for gas in his life. He's got this car from his executive mom. He runs it at any gas station. So we all thought the guy was the luckiest guy in the world when we got cars. Because man, who would want lifetime free gas? We all would, right?
Right.
Yeah. So that I remember. His first car was this orange Dodge Caliber. The best story I've got about it is I used to work at a garden center. We were gonna have a drinking party one night, and I had to work this closing shift. And it was in the springtime. For whatever reason, it wasn't busy at all that day. So there were literally two cars in the entire parking lot. There was mine and there was his when he drove in, because I had to transfer some beer into his car so he could take it home, chill it. And then 3 hours later, when I was ready to party, we'd have chilled beer. But the owners, these Dutch people, really nice people, mentors of mine, I would say, almost family. But they had a home on the property of the garden center. And the parking lot was some distance away. But I get this, I had already shuffled the beer into his car, and I get this panicked radio call because Leland, you never see him stand up, but he's a big, tall guy. He is a tall guy. And I get this panicked radio call from the owners saying, saying some big, scary looking man with a sports car is in the parking lot, and I need to check up on what he wants. I just thought it was the funniest friggin' thing, man. Leland is, first of all, a Dodge Caliber is not a sports car. These people, these Dutch people do not know their cars. Second of all, for them to be afraid of Leland, first of all, I was just a stupid kid. I'm happy they didn't see me chuck beer in the back of his car. That would have been way worse. But yeah, I still bug him about that, him and his sports car, because of course it wasn't. But it was funny. He got another car after that. I think it's still I think he still has it, but he had the car for about 2 days, and then we're gonna go on vacation together. Leland, myself, and a few buddies. And this one guy, his name was Mike. We get to where we're going. Again, I have to stress this: two or 3 days after Leland gets brand new car, wasn't used, brand new, and I forget what model it was. But we're about to park it in the garage, and we wanted to bail out a bunch of stuff from the car, bring it to the fridge, bring our sleeping bags in. And this guy, Mike, leaves his passenger side door open. Only Leland was in the driver's seat, and he was looking forward. So I'm like, yeah, I'm done. Close my door. Marty's out. Yeah, he's done. My brother's out. He's done. This guy, Mike, leaves his door open and walks away. And he goes, yeah, I'm done. And then Leland drives his car into the garage, kind of maybe a little faster than he should have, but boom, on the side of the garage, dents that door, terrible dent, day 3 of the car. He's absolutely choked. This guy, Mike, never apologizes, acts like, what? You should have noticed the door. It's not my fault to say I'm ready and not close the door. And, oh, man, I thought Leland was going to kill that guy or kill all of us or kill somebody. But, yeah, I had to throw in a few Leland stories there. So, yeah, first car stories, man. It seems like everybody's got them. Everybody has stories about their first vehicle or two there. But, yeah, sounds like we had some pretty crappy rides. Why don't you lead us into this where we talk about the fantasy cars we actually would want?
Right? So, what kind of car would you guys want to have if you won the lottery? So, say if you won $1 million, what kind of car would you want to go and buy? Now for me, I am. If you would have asked me a few years ago, it would have been like a Lambo or a Ferrari or something like that. Oh, I would have been all into a car like that. But I'm getting older, guys. And I like luxury. I want a car where I can sit in it and it's like being on the couch, that type of thing. So honestly, these days, but I still want some power. So honestly, these days I would probably go with like a Bentley. That would be my car right there. Just like, don't they have like a V12 in them, and they're just some badass fast luxury cars that's like pure luxury. I mean, you open up the door and you got like a little place where your umbrella goes in so you can pull it out and go to the door, and it's just like, what the hell? Just some of the stuff they have in these cars, just all the luxury items. But for me, it'd be more for the performance of the car. I mean, honestly, a Bentley is almost like a sports car, but in a luxury car package. So it's like literally a 1 or 2 ton car or something that can just do amazing things. I mean, just it can make corners, it can accelerate. Just an amazing car. So that's the one I would pick. What about you, Moby?
Yeah, I went a different direction with this question because I did consider if there were any commercially available cars that I would really want, but to be honest, nothing was coming to mind. And the question was, hey, you win the lottery, what would you buy? Well, to be quite honest, the number one car I would buy is like a DeLorean replica, like so it looks like the time machine, silver, all the Mr. Fusion on the back, functional LEDs everywhere, the clock in the center that I could punch in what date we're traveling. If honestly, man, if I had won the lottery, that is what I would buy. And second, I hate to make this boring. Second next to the DeLorean would be a KITT. Done similarly up. It would have the voice. I could press buttons, get it to say different voice commands. Again, have the red LEDs going all over that thing. I mean, yeah, I just really, for a commercial car, just a commercially available vehicle, yeah, I would probably still be for like a Ferrari or something like that again. I don't have the most creative answer to that question, but yeah, it would definitely be a DeLorean replica. I guess one curveball I could throw at you, maybe you can find a picture to splice in for the video, but there was a DeLorean-like car called the Bricklin SV1 that is
Mhm.
close to me. The Bricklin is Canadian made. I believe the factory was in the province of New Brunswick, so Canadian pride here. Also, like in real life, I'm actually quite experienced in the plastics industry. That's what I work in, and the Bricklin SV1 was specifically designed for safety using a number of elastomers, so polyurethane and rubber. So a lot of impact points to create safety. Like it had a telescoping front bumper that you can tell very much is meant to compress and bounce back. Gull wing doors still. In fact, Brooklyn, I've got these. They're actually right behind me. When I have guests over for our coasters, drink coasters, I have these laser cut balsa wood coasters with the Bricklin SV1 on it. So, yeah, I mean, it's not commercially available nowadays, but for a car that's not a movie prop or replica, I would pick the Bricklin SV1.
So that's gonna probably bring us to the end of the episode. I just wanted to thank all the viewers out there, everybody that watched the episode. If you like what you guys have seen, don't forget to hit that like, that subscribe, and that notification bell. That way you get notifications when we drop content like this. So from RGX,
Moby here. You can catch our podcast, Leland and I, the T-hud Popcast at www.ttpopcast.com. That's where you can find us, our episodes. We're also on Facebook. Really enjoyed the episode today with the RGX. Hopefully next month, knock on wood, we'll have Leland back with us. And for you viewers, really appreciate you joining us today and your patience if the episode seemed just a little bit different. Not having other host here, but I thought it went pretty well. And we'll join you guys again next month. Peace out.